So in Australia, we tend to start our sessions like this with an acknowledgement of country. And so I know that we're all in different places and it might not be a tradition elsewhere, but because it's Australia morning, I'm just acknowledging that I'm on Gadigal lands of Eora Nation, and acknowledging the traditional owners of this land. And I felt that this slide was really relevant to this introduction because whilst talking about possibilities, like the top two things are what I'm talking about today, what could be and what is to come. I recognize that when colonial people explored what was possible and decided to travel the world and take over other countries, that they also cut off other possibilities for other people. So what is not, or what might never have been, or what might have been in possible, also become sort of pertinent in this context. So if I can change a slide, my talk is about virtual utopias and liminal spaces. So I'm going to talk first about liminal spaces, then about utopias, and then about a transformative learning experience and some research I've been doing around transformative learning. But first, liminal spaces. I see these as an incredible space between what is impossible and what is possible. And I see the impossible as a creative constraint. Let me explain. Recently, we had a global studio. I take students to one of my favorite places in the world, Auroville in South India. One of the people here in this talk, Lucy, was a previous student, Lucy Allen. She went on one of these real live trips to Auroville when she was a student. But this year, it became impossible for various reasons. And so I was tasked with the possibility of running it virtually and taking students into a liminal space. Now, a liminal space is defined, a concept from anthropology, it came from the whole idea of betwixt and between, not quite here, not quite there. So how do you create the possible and the impossible within the impossibility of going to India? How do you create this liminal space in a room in Sydney where you actually take people on a journey and explore what is possible internally as well as externally? And how do you explore that in a learning context? And how do you use that impossibility as a creative constraint? So those were some of my questions that I asked myself. And I saw this space. And it was quite terrifying. Liminality can often be really terrifying when you go into it. I was quite terrified. Anything could go wrong, let alone trying to coordinate people's hours across countries. But community partners in a utopian community in South India, plus internet issues, plus doing this virtually, which was a very liminal space. But I do see liminality, and always have, as a space for emergence, for creativity, growth, meaning, purpose, discovery, and all of the above, all those beautiful things. It's this rich space of uncertainty that is betwixt and between, as Victor Turner said. And so folklorist Van Gennep talked about this idea of liminality in between, in the context of an initiation. So you go from an old self, say if you're in a tribal society and you get initiated, you get taken out of that society and you come back as a man. So my husband has lived in Papua New Guinea in a village, and he said people just disappeared and they arrived back as men. There was nothing in between. There was no adolescence. And this is often seen as a threshold. And I thought I'd give a little example of this from my own culture. I'm half Indian, and this is Narsim. He's the god of liminality, I guess, if you say. He's half lion and half human. And he was created to defeat a demon who had a great boon that he could never be killed and he would never die. Yet he was creating havoc in the world. But he had the boon that he would never he could not die at night or day. He could not die. He would not be killed by man or beast, and he would not die indoors or outdoors. So this God was created, Narsim, who was able to defeat the demon between night and day at dusk, at a threshold, like a porch, rather than inside or outside. And he was neither human nor beast. So he was half lion and half human. So that's the kind of my definition of what liminality means. It's this betwixt and between idea of and powerful things can happen, initiations, transformation, um, and 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 this whole idea of overcoming difficulties. So I was really interested too in when this invitation came to submit an abstract for possibility studies, and with its link to utopias, also the link to the ancient philosophical question around how then shall we live. And I've been doing a little bit of work on utopias. Naturally, I'm really interested in them because I like to go there and I like to have my research based on things that I'm really passionate about and kind of generative and creative and contribute to my joy and my thriving too. So this is one explanation of what a utopia is. Now, the word utopia was first coined by Sir Thomas More in 1516. It comes from the Greek word no place, which is also similar to good place. So it doesn't exist, and yet it's really good. So you can already see the parallel I'm making between this utopia as a liminal space. It's not here nor there. And the contemporary understanding of a utopia is that it's not a static state. It's not a state that you've arrived at. So you can't say, oh, that utopia has failed, because it's an experiment in the making. We're still getting there. It's had a long history from this very uniquely human capacity to imagine the possible. What's possible, what is a better way to live? And it's been explored by Buddhist and Christian monastic traditions, a couple of thousand years old, but there have been three more recent waves. The first wave was in the 19th century, and then the hippie communes of the 1960s. And now there's a third wave. It's described as sustainability related communities, or sometimes called eco-villages. And now there are 10,000 of them, if you please, in 144 countries. So really worth studying. And that's just a statistic from the Global Eco-Village Network, which is sponsored by UNESCO and sort of tracks and helps these communities cohere in their vision. So they take many forms. They've gone from, the fictional philosophical imaginings of the ideal state in the Republic to utopias that are purely literary, such as Aldous Huxley's Ireland, right through to these lived experiences such as Auroville. And that's a flag being raised. When it was started in South India, it had the mission, an incredible mission to experiment with the whole concept of lived human unity. So there's no property ownership there either. There's traditionally no money. So and in the Auroville Charter, it says that Auroville belongs to nobody in particular, and Auroville belongs to humanity as a whole. Huge ambition. So you can see that they're really exploring what the possible is. A place of unending education is another thing of the Charter, and a bridge between the past and the future. So lots of experimentation, lots of future thinking goes on there. And a site for research, which is why it's a beautiful place to go and visit and be part of that research there. So utopias in between the possible and possible. And I've got a picture here of India in chaos. I mean, India, I didn't want to put people in chaos right now, but, right now there's a humanitarian crisis, as you know, happening there. And Auroville was specifically set up by a woman called Mira Alfassa because it was thought that India had all the problems in the world, and if we're going to solve them, this is the site for solving them. Right now, there's a major catastrophe happening there, and Auroville is not untouched. Everyone, including myself, knows several people who have lost several people in their families. So it's a big place to sort out and tackle some of these big challenges. And here's a little bit of information on this whole idea between the possible and the impossible. The utopian impulse can be harnessed to challenge taken for granted visions of the future. And it's a form of context-specific experimentation that's critical to understanding processes of change towards desirable futures. I really recommend this article by Faizi et al. Vlad, how you've created this manifesto, sociocultural. creativity. Faizi et al. Have created this manifesto for transformative research that is really cool, and all the things that are required for transformative research to take place. And one of the things that they kind of offer is, you know, transdisciplinary research, studying consciousness, utopias, amongst many other things. So they're in between the possible and impossible. They're a state of never arriving. They're criticized for being unfeasible, implausible daydreaming, and the notion that perfection is impossible. But like I said, the current notion of a utopia is this idea that it's a state in the making. It's a state of becoming, if you like. And so I kind of like this slide one of my Aurovillian colleagues created for one of my classes, a search on Auroville. What is it? It's so many different things to so many different people. Is it a utopia? So many things are said about yes, no, of course it is. And it's still a state of arrival. So it is a state of becoming possible. And I love this quote by a wonderful Professor Karen Litfin. She's from Washington, and I've met her in Auroville. She had a super cool research grant to go and study eco-villages around the world. She came to Auroville. She had this beautiful metaphor of this possibility that an eco-village represents. And she's described it as a pioneer species. And a pioneer species is a kind of weed that goes out into a desert. So if you think of the world as this kind of desert where things are really getting messed up, these are kind of spaces that are set aside to explore what is possible. And a pioneer species isn't the ultimate form of life that will grow, but they have a restorative work to do, and they create the soil for a visible future. And I like that metaphor as a metaphor of liminality. They're a weed on their way to becoming a forest. They're in this state of exploring what the possible is. So a little bit about Auroville, founded in 1968. That photo you saw earlier, there were people from all over the world, ambassadors and so on, formed by a very famous philosopher, Sri Aurobindo, Indian philosopher, intended as a laboratory for working out a society of the future that would realize human unity and diversity. Have to understand this was right after World War, when, you know, millions of people, 55 million and above, were killed. And so it was a human laboratory to explore the possible. Nowadays, there's about 3,000 people there, over 50 nations. And this speaks to Vlad's point about sociocultural context of the possible. And he said, the possible emerges within and transforms our experience of the here and now whenever multiple perspectives originating from various positions and actions in the world are placed in dialogue with each other, leading to the emergence of novel understandings, actions, and ways of being. And I've done some work on the diverse context of Auroville and people living from every single country, and an experiment in no religion as well, and yet a very deeply spiritual society. This very emergent, fertile ground, a cradle for possible, as you would say. So what are their experiments with the possible? They have many ongoing experiments. You know, there's this inner development, this conscious evolution of human and the society around. So lots of work in the the bioregion. For example, they have projects for menstruation, and a company called EcoFem that distributes these ecological sanitary pads. They have learning about waste, a wasteless organization. They have lots of communal organization, lots of things that they do around, like citizens assembly. They explore with all of those, and collective decision making. They do a lot of reforestation. It was originally the narrative of Auroville is that it started off as a plateau that was just dead dirt kind of thing. Loads of culture, art, music, theater, all for free, so you don't pay to go there. Lots of incredible agriculture, and of course, a whole agenda around transformative education, conscious economics, no money. How do we live without that one thing that impacts on everyone's kind so hugely, that money, that material imperative. So Auroville in 1970s, this barren plateau, was worked on by people came from all different countries, but you see the development of it now. Now it has that big sort of Matrimanda, the central sort of spiritual center, a big meditation chamber, lots of communities all around, scientific research. They have conferences, they do it all there. There's people visiting from universities around the world, and of course students. Those are my students there. I'm wondering if Lucy is there. Lucy's in the room, not in that particular pic. So how did we do it? We designed, so we got on Jamboard and we worked out what we did when we were actually there in person. And what is it that people loved? They loved the UNESCO Earth Institute and doing building with earth. They loved some of the aesthetic and spiritual practices like Kolam. They loved visits. They loved the trash and show. They have this incredible trash and show. They loved the awareness through the body session, which is a method unique to Auroville. They loved going on tours to see the Trash Mahal, which is this whole house created out of trash that's just beautiful. They loved, connecting with each other in more profound ways, being in nature, appreciating wholeness. So this was this impossible task. For how on earth do we create this amount of excitement in another country, in Australia? And we played around with how we could do it, potential assessment activities, and a whole new set of ideal learning goals that actually reflected what happened then, which we wanted students to have a profound new perspective about the world and have an actual worldview shift, which is what transformative learning is all about. We wanted students to act on the realizations that they encountered. We wanted lots of embodied learning, a sense of witness self, which is a very Aurovillian, very Indian idea. How do you witness self in action? We wanted this wonderful sense of collective wonder and applied hope. Students had actually done projects on that in the past. Profound realizations of self that had gone on in the past. And also notions on lack of separation, Auroville's approach to human unity and oneness with nature, with other, beyond human unity even. And an understanding of cultural difference and an understanding of whole being, what they call integral yoga or integral learning there. So, and we also wanted a gift exchange. All of those things happened, I might say, and it's too short a time to really talk about it, but it was awesome and so transformative and absolutely fed into this. It was designed, by the way, as a hero's journey. So I don't know how many people know about the hero's journey, but there's this phase that you go through of discovery where you actually, there's this refusal of the call for adventure where the hero goes, I don't want to go there, it's too scary. We had that. We had the Skeptic Society before people got right in there. We had people talking about their skepticism before they went through that journey together. So yes, Andrea's slide. I'm doing a bit of interactivation here. Andrea talked the other day about transformative experiences, and he talked about, the example of Scrooge in a Christmas store, in a Christmas carol, being transformed by something he'd experienced. And he talked about this idea that these transformative experiences generate profound and long-lasting shifts in core beliefs and attitudes. So my provocation is that these liminal spaces are really good for that profound and long-lasting shift in core belief and attitude. And they not only change what we know and value, but also how we see the world. Really quickly, because I'm sure I'm running out of time, these are some of the markers of peak transformative experiences that we've worked on. And it's a term, peak experiences in general is a term coined by Abraham Maslow back in 1971. And Maslow inquired into utopias and how individuals could become their best, most authentic possible selves. So he was looking at the possibility of growth and self. And so similar to transformative learning, he saw these peak experiences as those that can help us listen to our self-identity, those that could help us develop a cognition of being, those that could strengthen a consciousness of radical interconnectedness and unity, and create conditions for social improvement. So we created these peak markers around the experiences that students were having inspired by Maslow and William James's inquiry into mystical and spiritual states of consciousness. So really quickly, that significance is all about how students found an intense, profound experience that led to greater self-awareness, that sometimes was a bit of a turning point. The fulfillment, extremely positive, lasting, and richly rewarding experiences. Spiritual, that sense of a oneness, or we've heard that talked about in this conference, and wonder or ecstasy. And the ineffability, that's a really interesting one. Often the experience defies words. You can't put your finger on it. You can't describe one of those incredible experiences where you've gone through something transformative. And they also have a noetic quality. They're illuminations or revelations full of significance, which carry with them a curious sense of authority and transiency. You don't want it to stop, and yet they can't be sustained forever, because they are, in a sense, states of revelation. And you want them to continue, and you want to carry on feeling that there's an inner richness and importance there. So that's about it from me. Yeah.
Thank you.
A few points might be worth discussing if you felt like it.
Fantastic.